The Kalamazoo River runs from its mouth at Lake Michigan to more than halfway across the state, making it approximately 170 miles long. The river has many offshoots, forming smaller creeks. Over the past century, industrial activity has significantly increased in the region, and many of the currently existing cities along the river started out as paper mill towns. In 1921, 3 paper mills in Kalamazoo and Otsego, Michigan, merged to form the Allied Paper Corporation. These mills, situated along the Kalamazoo River, operated from the 1920s through the 1960s until they had depleted resources and the area was no longer viable. During their time of operation, the paper mills were responsible for dumping over 100,000 pounds of PCBs into the Kalamazoo River and Portage Creek. PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls, are a chemical byproduct of the paper mill's process. They belong to a broad family of man-made organic chemicals known as chlorinated hydrocarbons and are linked to a broad range of adverse health effects, most notably cancer. They were banned in the United States in 1979, but this did not rid the Kalamazoo River of nearly 50 years of accumulated PCBs. PCBs were first detected in the Kalamazoo River during routine sampling in 1971. To this day, residents of the Kalamazoo area are advised to avoid eating too much fish from the river. The high accumulation of PCBs in this section of the river led to the EPA listing it as a Superfund site. There are a total of 5 PCB landfill sites with high levels of polychlorinated biphenyls, stretching 80 miles from Saugatuck on the west to about 10 miles east of Battle Creek, near Sunrise Heights. The Allied landfill resides in the Edison neighborhood of Kalamazoo, and it occupies 89 acres, including Portage Creek between Cork and Alcott Streets in Kalamazoo.
CERCLA, or the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, was passed in 1980 out of 2 incidents. The first, in Love Canal, New York, resulted in increased levels of cancer and health impediments in the community after a chemical company buried 22,000 tons of toxic waste. The second was the Valley of the Drums in Kentucky, which is a 23-acre site of barrels containing hazardous chemicals that have over time leached into the soil and waterways. CERCLA serves 3 purposes. The first, as a means of removal, where compensation or liability is provided in cases of emergency response for sites of hazardous waste, like in the instance of Love Canal. Second, to provide remedial cleanup of inactive hazardous disposal sites, like the Valley of the Drums. And third, to establish prohibitions and requirements concerning closed or abandoned hazardous waste sites.
Me too.
In order to address the need for liability and compensation in these sites of hazardous waste that pose a threat to both human health and the environment, a Superfund was established. In CERCLA, a Superfund serves 2 purposes. Through appealing to the Department of Justice in a process of bidding, funds that come from a $1.6 billion trust fund are granted to sites of hazardous waste for EPA to spearhead cleanup, or covers cost differences if parties responsible for pollution go bankrupt or cannot be found liable. CERCLA, popularly called the Superfund Act, EPA as the primary institution for spearheading cleanup. Using RQs, or reportable quantities of pollution, the EPA can either compel polluters to clean up the sites or can turn to the Department of Justice to bid for money from the Superfund itself.
She moisturized today.
I did.
Excellent.
That's all.
In July of 2001, the Michigan Director of EPA took the lead on the cleanup of the Kalamazoo River. Along with gaining community members' support for getting ideas about the cleanup. In August 2002, a plan was generated and a meeting was held. The plan was to first, eliminate PCB sources, second, address in-stream sediments, and third, begin upstream and work downstream. In November of 2003, EPA awarded a technical assistance grant to the Kalamazoo Watershed Council. And then in June of 2004, the EPA had an update meeting. They wanted to move to a new method, modeling. This would help figure out how much of the riverbank, floodplain, and river sediment needed to be cleaned up until fish were edible. And then in February of 2005, there was the Weyerhaeuser settlement. This granted $6.2 million to EPA for response actions, and then the Weyerhaeuser company had to begin cleaning up the Kalamazoo River on their own. And then in February 2007, cleanup began, and agreements were finally made between the parties. The PRPs were to perform removal action and additional sampling of the Kalamazoo River. In August of 2007, it was announced that dredging had finally began in June. The toxic waste was being taken and disposed of properly. Through October 3rd, 17,325 cubic yards, or 495 truckloads, had been dredged. And then in March of 2008, studies were completed at each landfill site, and the biggest concern the EPA found were PCBs. And in September of 2008, a study was released that in 2007, 37,000 cubic yards, or 1,059 truckloads, were removed. And then by August 11th in 2008, there were 45,000 cubic yards, or 1,289 truckloads. In February of 2009, EPA was looking at alternative cleanup measures. And then in June 2009, EPA and Georgia Pacific came to an agreement. GP was to perform cleanup under EPA supervision and award $10 million over 3.5 miles from August until 2010. Millennium Holdings at this point had filed for bankruptcy, therefore they stopped with helping GP in cleanup. And then in September 2009, Millennium came up with a plan to clean up the Allied paper landfill. The formal plan was released in late 2010. In May 2010, there was a bankruptcy settlement with Lyondell. Lyondell was affiliated with Millennium Holdings. They had to pay $49.5 million for liabilities, along with an additional $3.2 million to the U.S. In 2012, the EPA completed studies of the Allied landfill in mid-2012, then stated that it would happen early 2013. In December of 2014, the feasibility study was released for the Allied landfill, and then in late spring of 2015, a proposed cleanup plan was created. Now, the latest was in December of 2014. They were saying cleanup will last until at least 2017.